I grew up in a town so small, the gas station doubled as the post office, and the diner ran out of eggs by 9 a.m. most days. We had one grocery store, one church, and enough gossip to fuel both. People here didn't leave. They got married, raised kids, maybe opened a lawn service or worked for the city. No one flew anywhere. Not really. And certainly not me. I was 25 and had never left the state of Kansas. Never spent a night outside the same 2 zip codes. Never owned a suitcase. Never needed one. I worked the front counter at a dry cleaning shop that shared a wall with the bait and tackle store. I came home every night to the same squeaky couch, the same box fan, the same 2 cats I'd rescued from a flood years ago. Safe. Predictable. Small. That was my life. That was the ground I knew. My cousin Mindy was the first one in the family to get out. She went to college in Arizona, then started teaching yoga to tech execs in Los Angeles. That's what she told us anyway, though it always sounded a little made up. She wore crop tops in winter and called our town nostalgic. Last month, she sent me a pale pink envelope with golden cursive on the front. You are invited to the wedding of Mindy Claire Stokes and Jonathan Rivera. Inside was a photo of her and some tall man with a beard standing in front of the ocean. The note said the wedding would be held at a private vineyard in Sonoma, California. That may as well have been another planet. My mom squealed. "You have to go," she said. "She's your cousin, and it's wine country." I didn't drink wine. I didn't fly. I didn't own a dress that didn't come from a discount rack. But I nodded. Because no one says no to my mom when she's already picked out a gift. Then, 2 days later, I got an email. Your ticket has been booked. Mindy had paid for it. Departure, Wichita. Dwight D. Eisenhower Airport. Arrival, Santa Rosa, California. Date, May 11th. Seat, 14A. I stared at the screen for 20 full minutes. I'd never been to an airport, let alone inside a plane. I Googled what to wear on a plane and ended up on a Pinterest board for fashion bloggers. Nothing helped. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't want the jokes. I could already hear them. "Look out, y'all, we got a world traveler here." No thanks. Instead, I bought a plain black duffel bag from Walmart and borrowed a pair of earbuds from my neighbor's teenage daughter. I packed exactly 1 dress, 2 changes of clothes, and a backup toothbrush. Just in case the first one failed, I guess. And the night before the flight, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't scared of flying. I was scared of not knowing what I was doing, of standing out, of getting it wrong. I kept thinking of what Mindy always said when she came home for holidays. You live like the world's never going to knock on your door. And maybe she was right, but now the world was buzzing just outside it, and it had a boarding pass with my name on it. The airport was bigger than I expected, and colder. Everything echoed. People moved fast, dragging shiny roller bags like they were late for something important. I stood in front of a giant touchscreen that asked if I was checking a bag. I poked at it like it might bite. A man behind me coughed. I stepped aside. A woman in a navy vest told me my gate was Terminal B, 2nd floor, past security. Security. Just hearing the word made my stomach turn. I'd read somewhere you had to take off your shoes. I hadn't worn socks, just flats. My heels were already blistering. I followed the arrows like I was in a maze. The line snaked through ropes like a theme park, but no one was smiling. No music, no cotton candy, just laptops and bins and people sighing. I clutched my ID like a lifeline and prayed I didn't accidentally pack something illegal. What even counted as illegal? A nail file? A travel-sized bottle of shampoo? The TSA agent scanned my ticket, nodded once, and waved me through like I was no big deal. but to me, it was everything. At gate B14, I found a seat near the window and tried not to cry. Not because I was sad, but because I couldn't breathe right. Everything felt too loud, too bright. The announcements, the rolling carts, the beeping. A little girl sat across from me, licking the last of a chocolate bar while her dad scrolled on his phone. She looked like she'd done this 100 times. I felt like an alien in a human suit. When they called boarding, my heart started pounding. Group B. That was me. I stood. My hands were sweating. My duffel bag strap dug into my shoulder. I walked down the jet bridge with people in slacks and AirPods, wondering how everyone else looked so calm. The plane smelled like fabric cleaner and something metallic. I found my seat. 14A. Window. Just like the ticket said. I sat down slowly, knees tight, arms locked. There was a plastic card in the seat pocket that said, "How to prepare for takeoff." I read it twice, then 3 times. I pressed the seatbelt buckle until it clicked and double-checked it like a child learning to swim. People filled in around me. Backpacks stuffed under seats. Flight attendants pushing carts. The air got thicker. My palms itched. Then he arrived. Not with fanfare, not with noise. Just presence. He was tall, maybe early 40s. Crisp white shirt, rolled up at the forearms, leather briefcase slung over one shoulder, dark navy blazer in hand. He looked at me, then at the numbers above. "That's 14B, he said, with a voice like velvet filtered through gravel. I blinked. "Oh, yeah. Sorry." I scrambled upright to let him in. My elbow knocked the tray table. He didn't react, just nodded and slid into the seat beside me. I stared straight ahead like a statue. He pulled out a book. Hardcover. No title on the front, just black. Of course he reads hardcover books with no titles. The engine hummed louder. The plane backed away from the gate. I gripped the armrest. The metal felt cold and wrong. My breath shortened. My vision tunneled. Then the wheels lifted. My body betrayed me. I panicked. Not in a cute way. Not in a gasp and clutch pearls way. I reached for something. Anything. And my hand landed on him. Not his armrest. Not his sleeve. His thigh. Firm. Warm. Definitely not a seatbelt. Time stopped. I froze, hand still pressing down, skin against smooth wool slacks. He turned slowly, like he wasn't surprised. Like this had happened before, though I doubted it had. His eyes were slate gray, steady, the kind that didn't startle easily. "That's not the armrest," he said quietly. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My heart was sprinting. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean... I got scared and..." He raised one hand, palm out, like a traffic cop stopping a runaway sentence. "It's fine," he said, not unkindly. "First flight?" I nodded, still too stunned to let go. He looked down at my hand, still on his leg, then back at me. "You can hold on," he said. "Just maybe not so tightly." I yanked my hand back like I'd touched fire. He gave the faintest smile. Not amused, not smug, just human. The plane leveled out. So did my breathing. But I didn't look at him again. Not yet. I turned to the window instead and watched the clouds. But all I could feel was the ghost of my hand still resting on the wrong thing. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. The cabin lights dimmed. The pilot said something cheerful over the speaker. Something about clear skies and a smooth ride. But my ears were still ringing from the embarrassment. I kept my hands firmly in my lap, fingers laced together like a prayer I didn't know how to say. The man beside me, seat 14B, didn't seem bothered. He turned a page in his book like nothing unusual had happened. No thigh had been grabbed. No girl had nearly cried in his personal space. He had a watch. Not the digital kind. The real kind. Gold rim. Black leather strap. It looked older than me. I tried not to glance again, but there was something different about him. Not in a flashy way. Just a quiet sort of certainty. Like he didn't second-guess himself the way the rest of us did. I finally whispered, "I'm sorry." Again. I didn't mean to, well, you know. He didn't look up, just said calmly, "You're not the first person to panic on a plane." I blinked. "I'm guessing I am the first to mistake your leg for an armrest, though." That got a smile. Brief. Real. He closed the book but didn't tuck it away. Just rested it in his lap. "First flight?" he asked. I nodded. "First time doing anything that requires a boarding pass." "You're doing all right." I gave him a look. I grabbed a stranger's thigh mid-takeoff. He shrugged. "I've had worse seatmates." I cracked a nervous smile. It felt foreign on my face, like I hadn't worn it in a while. We sat in silence for another stretch of time, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, just paused. I turned toward him. "Do you fly a lot?" He nodded once. "Often enough that I don't hear the engines anymore." "Must be nice." "It gets old." Something in his voice shifted then. Not cold, not sad, just distant. "What do you do?" I asked, realizing too late it might be too forward. He didn't hesitate, but he didn't answer directly either. "Business," he said. "Lots of meetings, rooms with glass walls and bad coffee." "Sounds glamorous." He looked at me, this time directly. "It's not." And then, to my surprise, he asked, "What about you?" I laughed softly. "You mean besides harassing people on airplanes?" He didn't laugh. He waited. So I answered, "I run a dry cleaning counter in a town no one's ever heard of. I can spot a mustard stain from 10 feet away." He smiled again. "Useful skill. Questionable career. Necessary career." There it was again, that way he spoke. Not with charm, not with ego, just presence. Like he didn't need to prove anything. Like the world adjusted to him, not the other way around. I stared at his hands. Not in a weird way. Okay, maybe in a slightly weird way. They were the kind of hands that had signed important papers, held pens made of metal, gestured across boardrooms. I thought, he doesn't live in the same weather I do. He probably ate at restaurants that didn't laminate their menus, slept in places where the sheets had a thread count higher than my rent. I'd never met someone like that. And yet, here we were. Me, with my thrift store hoodie and shaking knees. Him, with his tailored jacket and calm breath, hurtling through the sky together. "Do you always talk to strangers on planes?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "Only when they grab me." Fair. Chapter. The flight attendant came by with water and pretzels. I declined both. He took a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Figures. I looked out the window. The clouds didn't look like pillows the way cartoons made them seem. They looked endless, cold, untouchable, like him. But when I glanced sideways again, he was already watching me, not staring, just noticing, and for a moment I forgot about the altitude. The seatbelt sign came on again, and the pilot's voice returned, saying we'd begin our descent into Santa Rosa shortly. My stomach tightened. Not from fear. Not this time. Something else. Like I wasn't ready to land. The man beside me, Julian, though I still didn't know that yet, folded his book closed and tucked it back into his bag. Everything about his movements was quiet, efficient, as if even gravity listened to him. The plane tilted slightly downward. Outside the window, the clouds thinned, giving way to sunlit patches of earth grapevines, rooftops, the glint of a reservoir. California looked nothing like home. I felt small again, but not in the same way I used to. This time, it wasn't shame, it was awe. The wheels touched down smoother than I expected. A soft bump, a slowing hum, then applause from somewhere in the back. Not sarcasm, genuine relief. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled, slowly. My palms weren't shaking anymore. Beside me, he reached up and opened the overhead bin. Without asking, he pulled down my duffel bag. One hand. Effortless. He set it on my seat gently. "You okay?" I nodded. I didn't throw up, so... Win. He smiled again. Smaller this time. Like it was for him, not the world. We stood when the row ahead of us moved. People shuffled forward, pulling bags, adjusting jackets, calling loved ones. I reached for my bag, but he held it for a beat longer. Then he said, quiet and certain, "Don't let the sky scare you forever." I didn't have anything smart to say back. I just nodded again, then followed the crowd off the plane. The air bridge felt warmer than the plane, more grounded, but I already missed the altitude. We walked side by side down the terminal without speaking, not awkwardly, just letting it be. When we reached the carousel area, I pointed toward a sign that said "Rideshare Pickup." "This is me," I said, suddenly unsure if I should have said anything at all. He gave a soft nod. "Safe travels, then." "You too," I offered. I meant it. He hesitated, then added, "And hey, if you ever get on a plane again, remember? It gets easier." I gave a small smile. "Only if I get the window seat." That earned a low laugh. The first real one. It warmed something in me. He didn't say goodbye. He just looked at me, really looked, and then turned and walked away. No phone number, no email, not even a last name. Nothing to hold on to but a few shared breaths in midair. I stood there for another minute, holding my bag like it might float away. The automatic doors whooshed open beside me, letting in California light. The moment was over. But it had happened. Home didn't change while I was gone. Same pothole at the corner of Maple and 2nd. Same flickering street lamp outside the dry cleaner. Same handwritten sign at the diner window. Breakfast served all day. But something in me didn't slot back in right. Like my body knew this place, but my mind had taken a few steps farther than the welcome mat. I'd only been gone 3 days, but it felt like I'd lived something bigger than anyone here would understand. Mom met me at the little local airport in her old Dodge. She hugged me like I'd survived a war. How was it? She asked before I even buckled my seatbelt. I gave her the safe version. Beautiful wedding, lots of wine. Mindy cried during the vows. She nodded, satisfied. That's good. You look thinner. I smiled and turned toward the window. What I didn't tell her was that the part of the trip that stayed with me had nothing to do with the wedding. Nothing to do with Mindy or vineyards or even California. It was 14B. I didn't know his name. Not yet. But I kept replaying that flight like it was a movie only I had access to. The sound of his voice, the steadiness in his hands, the way he said, "Don't let the sky scare you forever," like it wasn't just about planes. Back home, I slipped into my old rhythms, but nothing fit quite the same. The dry cleaner buzzed. The conveyor spun. The bell on the door rang every 14 minutes like clockwork. But I started waking up an hour earlier. I started writing again. Not just in my notebook, but on the computer I barely used except for paying bills. Short pieces, snippets of thought, little monologues that didn't seem to have an audience but felt good to release. I wrote about fear, about how it doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers. I wrote about his, mine, how they'd met in a moment neither of us expected. And I wrote about movement, about what it means to leave, even just once. Then, a week later, my friend Jess sent me a link. She works at the local library and knows I write, even if I rarely show her anything. The subject line said, "You should apply. Seriously." I clicked. It was for a grant program called Women Creating Westward, an 8-week residency in Oregon, for women from rural towns who wrote, painted, filmed, or made anything with heart. We're looking for unheard voices from unheard places. The description felt like it was calling someone else, someone braver, more interesting. But the deadline was 2 days away. I stared at the application for a full hour before I typed my name, and then I attached a piece I wrote the night I got back. It was short, about 5 paragraphs. All it said, really, was this. I used to think the sky belonged to people who knew where they were going, but maybe it also belongs to people who are just willing to go. I didn't tell anyone I applied. I figured they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd mean well. I forgot about the application the moment I sent it. That's how I survive most things. I pretend they didn't matter. Easier than waiting. Easier than wanting. A week passed. Then 2. I kept writing, mostly late at night when the house was still and my thoughts had room to move. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just trying to be less stuck. Then, one Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. An email. Subject: Women Creating Westward. Decision notification. I stared at it like it might explode. My hands felt weirdly cold as I tapped to open. Dear Clara, we are excited to inform you that you have been selected as one of 12 artists for the fall cohort of the Women Creating Westward residency. Your piece, Hands in the Air, moved our selection panel. We believe your voice is one that deserves space to grow and be heard. Orientation begins September 2nd in Eugene, Oregon. Please confirm your attendance by August 15th. I reread it 3 times. Then again, I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't being pranked. They said yes. They said yes to me. I stared at the words on the screen and tried to understand what they meant. Oregon wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a weekend. It was 8 weeks. A whole season. In a place I'd never been. With people who probably drank oat milk and used the word installation in casual conversation. I didn't have the clothes. I didn't have the vocabulary. But I had the email. And something inside me, small but stubborn, refused to let it go. I told my mom that night. She paused the TV, blinked at me, then said, "Well, you can't turn that down." I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my chest yet. Because saying yes meant flying again. Another airport, another seat, another chance to panic and grab something I shouldn't. But I wasn't the same girl who'd flown to Sonoma with a borrowed duffel and trembling hands. Not entirely. I pulled up a map of Eugene. I Googled the campus where the residency would be hosted. It looked like a postcard, trees with red leaves, open patios, studios with big windows. I clicked through profiles of past fellows, poets, painters, a sculptor who worked with scrap metal and grief. All of them seemed like real artists. I still felt like a tourist in someone else's dream, but I booked the ticket anyway. Seat 16A. Another window seat. Sen. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I made lists. Practical ones. What to pack, how to get from the airport to the housing, where to find the closest pharmacy in case I got a sinus infection. And then the other list. The real one. It was shorter. 1. Speak up. 2. Say yes. 3. Don't run when it feels like too much. 4. Write something that scares me. 5. If he's there, don't look away. I didn't even know why I wrote that last line. He wasn't going to be there. This was my thing, my chance. But still. The night before the flight, I repacked my bag 3 times. I printed out the email, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the front pocket of my journal. Proof that someone saw me, that something was happening. I curled up on my bed and stared at the ceiling. 10. This time, I wasn't just afraid. I was curious. About the world. About what I might become. About who I could be when I stopped living like the safest thing was silence. The welcome hall smelled like fresh paint and brewed coffee. Rows of chairs faced a small stage flanked by abstract art and long-stemmed plants I couldn't name. The name tags clipped to lanyards felt too official for someone like me, like I was borrowing an identity I hadn't quite earned. My hands were cold again. I sat near the back, clutching the schedule like it might tell me how to breathe. Opening remarks. 9:00 a.m. Keynote speaker. Julian R. Pierce, board chair, WCW. I didn't register the name at first. It was just another line of text in a bold font, until the lights dimmed and he walked on stage. And I stopped breathing. It was him. 14B, blazer, watch. Calm like a lake with no wind. Except now he had a microphone, a spotlight, a title. Julian R. Pierce. The man I accidentally grabbed mid-takeoff was the one running the entire program. My stomach flipped like a switchblade. He stood at the podium and spoke with ease about rural voices, about silence as resistance, about why creative women needed rooms with doors that locked from the inside so they could think without interruption. I heard the words, but all I could feel was heat crawling up my neck. He didn't look nervous. He looked in charge. Like this was his element, like everything fit. I sat frozen in a metal chair, praying he wouldn't look my way, hoping he wouldn't recognize me. Also, hoping he would. After the speech, the lights came up. The crowd clapped. People whispered praise to each other. Brilliant. Exactly what we needed to hear. I stayed seated, stunned. He stepped down from the stage and moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments with that same unreadable expression I remembered from the plane. And then, his eyes met mine. For a second, I thought I imagined it. That stillness, that slight head tilt. But then he blinked. The moment passed. He moved on. I couldn't tell if he didn't recognize me, or if he was pretending not to, which felt worse. The rest of the morning blurred. Workshops, icebreakers, a tour of the dorms where we'd be staying. I nodded when people spoke to me, laughed in the right places, wrote my name on a whiteboard like I wasn't spiraling inside. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, about that flight, that hand, that voice telling me it was okay to hold on. Was it nothing to him? Just one of 100 plane rides? Or was he the kind of man who knew exactly when to forget? Yeah, I found myself standing alone by the coffee table at lunch, holding a paper cup and staring at the lid. A woman beside me said, "He's even more handsome in person, right?" I blinked. "Julian," she clarified. "He usually doesn't do these things. Big deal that he's here this week." I nodded, though I didn't know what to say. She kept talking. "He funds half of this place. Low profile, though. Doesn't even let them put his photo on the website." That explained why I hadn't recognized the name on the program. I never knew his last name until today. Julian Pierce, man of glass rooms and bad coffee, and apparently, vineyards, too. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan. The room was plain but warm. A desk, a window, a little corkboard with a pinned quote, "Art begins where certainty ends." I wondered what Julian would say to that. I wondered if he remembered my voice, or just my panic, or if I was just another face he let slip through his memory to make room for more important things. On the third day of the residency, they asked us to submit a short piece for feedback. Any genre, any length, just something that felt like you. I stared at the blinking cursor for hours. Everyone else seemed to know exactly who they were. There was a woman from Vermont who wrote eco-poetry, a mother of 3 who was working on a novel about lineage and land. Even the sculptor from Boise submitted a handwritten essay on grief and steel and fathers who don't hug back. I had no idea what to offer. All I had were fragments, pages filled with small, incomplete thoughts, half-shaped sentences that sounded too delicate to speak aloud. But around midnight, I opened the folder on my desktop labeled "Not Ready," and I clicked on something called Window Seat. It wasn't a story. Not really. Just a letter to no one. About flying. About fear. About what it meant to touch someone by accident and feel safer. Not ashamed. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. Chulma. The next morning, I printed it out. 3 double-spaced pages. No title on top. I slid it into the submission box outside the studio door, cheeks burning. Immediately regretted it. I tried to act normal the rest of the day. Drinking bad coffee, taking notes in a panel discussion about artistic self-doubt, nodding earnestly as if I weren't dying inside. I told myself no one would read it closely, that it would get skimmed like all the others. Anonymity had always been my shield. But that afternoon, during studio hours, I found something taped to the door of my workspace. A small sheet of paper torn from a notebook. The handwriting was neat, slanted, careful, masculine. Clara, don't look away. You have something real. J.P. I held the note like it might disappear if I breathed too hard. I read it 3 times, then folded it, then unfolded it again. I knew the initials. I knew the writing because I'd seen that exact tilt when he signed the customs form on our flight. Julian. He read it. Not just read it, saw it. And he didn't correct me, didn't critique the structure or suggest stronger verbs. He simply said, "Don't look away. You have something real." I didn't know what to do with that, with being seen, not pitied, not patronized, not applauded for surviving or for being brave, just seen for the words I wrote, for the quiet truth inside them, and maybe for the part of me that still hoped someone would notice without me having to beg. That night, I lit the tiny desk lamp and opened a new document. For the first time, I didn't write like I was hiding behind a curtain. I wrote like someone might actually listen, like maybe my voice wasn't too quiet after all. The paper stayed with me, folded in half, tucked in the back of my notebook. No signature, no date, just those 3 lines. But it felt heavier than a certificate or a prize or even a handshake. It felt like permission. Julian never made announcements. He didn't lead workshops or stand in the spotlight after that first day, but he was there, every morning. Same dark blazer, same quiet shoes, same calm like weather that knew what it was doing. Sometimes he stood at the back of the room with a paper cup in hand. Sometimes he walked the garden path just before breakfast, pausing to read something on his phone. Never hurried, never loud, always present. Like gravity, not the kind that drags you down, the kind that keeps you from floating off. I started noticing the details, how he took his tea, not coffee, despite the first flight. Earl Grey, no milk, always hot, always in a ceramic mug with one chipped corner. How he always nodded once when someone greeted him, but never made them linger. How he paused by the studio doors mid-morning, just long enough to glance at the bulletin board without pretending he didn't care. Little things. Nothing headline-worthy. But I noticed. And quietly, I started waiting for them. Data. There was a stretch of sidewalk between the kitchen and the workshop that only caught morning light for about 20 minutes. That's where I first saw him standing alone, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a mug like he actually needed its warmth. I was walking by, notebook clutched to my chest, head down. He said softly, "You're writing more." It wasn't a question. I looked up. "How do you know?" He didn't smile exactly, just said, "The lights in your studio window are on late." I didn't realize anyone noticed. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. But I didn't look away. After that, it became routine. A glance exchanged at the breakfast line. A nod in the hallway. Once, he held the door open a few extra seconds when I was too deep in thought to notice my shoelace was untied. And on Wednesdays, always Wednesdays, He left behind a small glass jar of local honey by the tea station. No one said it was him, but I knew. I knew the handwriting on the label, the same slope, the same neat restraint. I didn't talk to him much, not really. We never sat together, never had a proper conversation, but it was enough to be noticed, to be witnessed, not as a project, not as a mistake, just as someone trying. And in the smallest, strangest way, I began to look forward to mornings. Not because they were new, but because they repeated. There was comfort in that, in the way he was simply there, not demanding space, just making room for it. That Friday night, the program hosted a film screening in the community hall, a documentary about Appalachian women rebuilding a town one mural at a time. It was quiet and beautiful and full of chipped paint and inherited grief. Everyone clapped when it ended. But it wasn't the kind of story you talk about right away. It lingered, left you a little softer. I stayed behind after most people filed out. Just long enough to fold my paper cup, toss it, and avoid being caught in the crowd of polite analysis. When I stepped outside, the air was cold. Colder than usual for October. The path back to the residential wing wound through a small garden and a line of old pine trees that whispered even when the wind didn't blow. That's where I found him. Or maybe he found me. Julian was standing near the gravel edge, hands in his coat pockets, staring out into the nothing like it might answer a question. He turned slightly when he heard my steps. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Didn't try," he said. I stopped a few feet away. The silence stretched, but it didn't break. He didn't move. Neither did I. Then, gently, he asked, "Walk a bit?" We walked in silence at first. Gravel underfoot. The soft click of his shoes, the quieter shuffle of mine. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that only happens when two people know how not to fill space just to avoid it. We passed the edge of the pines, reached the footbridge that crossed a dry creek. The moon was low but bright, brushing everything in silver. That's when I said it. Low, steady. "Do you remember me?" He didn't stop walking, but he turned his head slightly, eyes on me. "I never forgot." It hit me harder than I expected. I didn't realize I'd been bracing for the opposite. That he would say he meets too many people. That the flight blurred into others. That I was just one awkward girl who grabbed the wrong armrest. But he remembered, and he said it like it was never in question. We walked a few more paces. Then he added, almost like a confession, "You were the first person in years to touch me without asking." I blinked. "Sorry about that." He half smiled. "Don't be." I stopped at the edge of the trail. The trees thinned here. You could see the roof of the studios from this angle, lit up faintly from within like a lantern. I looked at him. Really looked. Same eyes, same calm, but not untouchable anymore. "I didn't think you recognized me," I said. He met my gaze. "I wasn't sure if you wanted me to." And there it was. That one sentence. Soft and careful and devastatingly kind. He hadn't ignored me. He hadn't forgotten. He was waiting on my terms, I swallowed the knot rising in my throat. "No one's ever said that to me," I whispered. He tilted his head, but didn't push. Didn't ask what I meant. Just let it hang there, like breath between us. We stood quietly, the air pulling between our sleeves, and for the first time in a long time I felt safe in someone's silence. Not dismissed, not forgotten, seen. He nodded toward the path. "Come on, you'll freeze out here." We walked back slowly. No more words. We didn't need them, because something had shifted, and I finally let myself believe. Maybe I'm not invisible to him after all. I met her by the tea table. She wore a charcoal suit in perfect posture, hair tied back in a twist so clean it looked permanent. Even the way she reached for a napkin felt rehearsed. She smiled politely when our hands brushed. "Clara, right?" I nodded, surprised she knew my name. "I'm Elise. I help Julian coordinate things behind the scenes donors, guest artists, the legal mess they like to ignore." She said his name like she had the right to. Maybe she did. I mumbled something polite, then started to step away, but she wasn't done. Her tone shifted, not rude, not sharp, just quieter, measured. "I noticed he's been spending time around your studio." I froze, cup half raised. She tilted her head, eyes sharp but not unkind. "I just thought it might help to know he does this sometimes." I frowned. "Does what?" She smiled again. This time it didn't reach her eyes. "Find someone new. Get curious. Inspire them a little. It's part of his pattern. Don't take it personally. Or worse, too personally." I stood there, stunned. She wasn't cruel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call me foolish. But somehow, it hurt more that way. Soft knives always cut cleaner. I nodded slowly, murmured thanks I didn't mean, and walked away. Back to my room. Back to myself. Back to the quiet place where doubt lives. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just shut the door. Inside. Outside. All of it. That night, I didn't write. The next morning, I skipped the tea station. I passed Julian once near the studio entrance. He looked at me, gave the same soft nod he always did. I nodded back, then kept walking. No words, no honey jar, no weight in the air. For the first time since arriving, I didn't turn in a writing sample during workshop rotation. My mentor noticed, asked gently if everything was all right. I told her I was just sitting with the work. She smiled like she understood. She didn't. Truth was, I wasn't writing because the words didn't sound like mine anymore. They sounded borrowed, hopeful, and hope, I'd just been reminded, is expensive. Too expensive for someone like me. I avoided the places I used to wait for him. No more garden benches, no more glances at the walkway during golden hour, and when I passed him in the hallway again 3 days later, I didn't stop. He didn't either. Maybe he felt it. Maybe that was the point. Some part of me wanted him to chase after me, to say Elise was wrong, to say I was different. But he didn't, and I couldn't ask. Because people like me don't ask men like that to explain themselves. We just retreat. Quietly. Elegantly, if we can manage it. Invisible again, if we must. The envelope was waiting on my studio desk. No name on the front, just my handwriting, taped back onto a plain manila folder like it had found its way home without needing directions. Inside, 2 things. A thin chapbook of poems, printed, bound, minimal cover design, and 1 page of my own writing. Handwritten, in pencil. Something I'd scrawled weeks ago in the margins of a journal and never meant to share. Chatty. I stared at it for a long time. The poems weren't mine. They were his. Not published. Not formal. Just quiet verses about stillness, weight, gravity, and air. I turned to the last page. That's where I saw it. My own handwriting, recopied in graphite, but it wasn't a photocopy. Someone had rewritten it by hand, line by line. My words, my phrasing, the exact rhythm I'd forgotten I ever let myself use. And beneath it, in neat, unmistakable script, don't silence the voice that tried so hard to speak. Jayed Sedumbe. Said, I didn't cry, but my throat burned like I had. He had found something I'd buried. Not just found it, but cared enough to write it out again, like it was worth holding on to. Like it was already a kind of literature, not a draft, not a mistake, a voice. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the page back into the envelope. I couldn't explain the feeling. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something raw. I felt seen, and it scared the hell out of me. Because when you live most of your life in the corners, quiet, helpful, easily excused, being noticed feels like exposure. Like standing in front of a window with the light behind you and the world staring in. I didn't know if he meant it as an invitation, or a dare, but I knew this. He saw me. Not the polished version, not the girl who finally wrote something decent. He saw the part I kept small on purpose, and instead of stepping back, he'd written it down, held it up to the light, and asked me not to hide again. Sen, I stared at the envelope a while longer. Then I did something I hadn't done in days. I picked up a pen. Not to write back. Not yet. Just to remember what it felt like. He found me in the firelight. I'd taken to working late in the common room, partly for the quiet, partly to avoid my own studio, where every surface now felt like it remembered too much. The flames in the old stone fireplace crackled low. Shadows danced across the floor in slow, waving gestures. I didn't hear him come in, but I felt it. That shift in the air when someone enters a room already full of unspoken things. Dum. I looked up. He was standing just inside the doorway, hands in his pockets, the envelope, the one he'd left tucked under his arm. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded, because I couldn't pretend I didn't. He didn't sit. Not right away. He walked slowly to the window, glanced out into the black beyond it, then turned to face me. His voice, when it came, was quiet, clear. "Did I hurt you, Clara? Or did someone else speak louder?" It wasn't what I expected. He didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew. I swallowed. My throat felt dry. "I thought I knew where I stood," I said. And then I didn't. He didn't interrupt. So I kept going. I'm used to being the kind of person people forget, or help once, then move on from. When Elise said when she implied I was just another project, another phase, you believed her, he finished. I nodded, because it made more sense than the alternative. And then, he sat then, not across from me, but nearby, close enough to hear my voice if it dropped. Which is what? He asked. That maybe I wasn't just a passing interest. He leaned back slightly, watching me. You think you're not worth more than passing interests? I laughed. Once. Bitter. It's not what I think. It's what life keeps teaching. Oi. He was quiet a moment. Then he said carefully, Do you want to know something about me? I looked up, surprised. He rarely talked about himself. He continued, I grew up in a house where silence was currency. You only spoke if you had something perfect to say. Everything else was a liability. He paused, looked straight at me, so I got good at being silent. And I got good at disappearing after things got real. My breath caught. Then why didn't you disappear this time? He looked almost surprised by the question. Then, because this time I saw someone trying to speak, and I knew what it would cost her. The fire popped softly beside us. I said nothing. There was nothing clever to say, only something honest. I don't know how to believe people like you mean it. His gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking you to believe yet. I'm just asking you not to vanish before you know if I do. Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was space, for truth to sit down beside us. Finally, I said, I'm scared I'm not enough when no one's watching. He didn't flinch, didn't rush to contradict. He just nodded. I know that fear, he said. But someone seeing you, truly seeing you, doesn't mean you're only real in their eyes. It just means you're not alone while you figure it out. I blinked. The tears didn't fall. But they were there, waiting. He stood then, slowly, gave me space. I'll leave you to your fire, he said gently. I looked at him. Thank you for the poems and the envelope. He nodded once, then walked out without looking back. But somehow I knew, this time, he wasn't walking away. We met again the next morning. No plan, just timing. I was sitting under the elm tree near the edge of the workshop garden, pretending to journal but mostly watching sunlight hit the dew on the grass. He walked up slow. No coffee this time, no folder in hand. Just himself. He didn't sit until I nodded. When he did, it wasn't like before. He sat not across from me, but beside me. I used to think being impressive would protect me, he said, without preamble. I turned my head, surprised. He didn't look at me, just watched the sky shift through the branches. I worked hard, built things, made money, hid behind titles and travel and the kind of solitude that makes people think you're mysterious when really, you're just scared. I didn't interrupt. He kept going. My father ran out of money and pride in the same year. My mother taught piano until her hands gave out. I didn't inherit anything but the belief that if I didn't become more, I'd disappear. He finally turned toward me. I wasn't born into this. I built it. And then it built walls around me. I swallowed, quietly, sitting with his arms folded, not closed off, just relaxed, watching, listening to every person, not just me. When they called my name, I stood. Not quickly, not like I was eager, but not like I was hiding, either. My boots thudded softly against the wooden floor as I walked up. My hands didn't shake. Not like before. The poem I held was called The Sky Between. I hadn't written it for anyone. Not for Julian. Not for the committee. Not even for the version of me that boarded a plane months ago, heart in her throat. I wrote it for the girl who once whispered her thoughts into notebook margins and hoped no one would find them. I wrote it for her. For me. I looked up once before I began. Julian's eyes were already there. Waiting. Not pulling. Not pushing. Just with me. I read. Steady. Even when the words got close. Even when my own voice startled me with its certainty. It wasn't a loud poem, but it was true. And when I reached the final line, the room didn't erupt. No gasps. No dramatic silence. Just a beat. Then soft, real applause. And for the first time, applause didn't feel like approval. It felt like space. I stepped down, passed the mic, sat back in my seat. Didn't look at him again. Didn't need to, because I could still feel it. That invisible thread between us, not binding, but steady. Later, people came to say kind things, compliments, fragments of praise. Some mentioned the language, others said they'd felt something shift. I nodded, thanked them, but I wasn't chasing their words. Because I'd already heard the one voice I used to think I needed. And tonight, I didn't need it to speak. I found my way back to the garden path alone. The moon was only a sliver this time, but I wasn't afraid of the dark. Not anymore. The air had cooled just enough to make me pull my sweater tighter as we walked. The reading was over. The chairs were folded, the room swept and dimmed. People lingered in small circles, finishing their wine, saying soft goodbyes that didn't yet feel final. But we slipped away. No announcements, no goodnight to the group. Just us, on the same gravel path we'd walked weeks ago, the one that led nowhere in particular. This time, our hands found each other without hesitation. No searching. No accidental brushes, just presence, just warmth. We didn't talk for the first few minutes. We didn't need to. The quiet between us wasn't filled with questions anymore. It was full of knowing. The moonlight filtered through the pine trees. The same trail. Same stillness, but I wasn't the same girl walking it. I was steadier. Not louder, not braver in the obvious ways, but more here, fully. He glanced at me once. His thumb brushed gently against the inside of my wrist, and then, With that calm he always carried like a second skin, he asked, "Would you try flying again?" Cheng. I smiled before I even turned to him, not because it was a romantic line, not because it was meant to be anything more than what it was, but because he asked it like he meant it. Not just the flight, but everything that comes with stepping off solid ground again. Some just end with two people walking side by side, finally brave enough to hold on, not because they need to, but because they want to.